Well, hey, everybody. Thanks for coming back for another week of the Life's Worth Living podcast. I'm your host, John Gossett, and I would like to thank our sponsor, GTM Builders, for allowing us to record in their beautiful model home in Overlake. If you're interested in building a new home, you need to look at these guys. Check them out at gtmbuilders.com. See what they have to offer. They are Tooele County's premier home builder. Tonight's episode 12, is brought to you by A. Warner Homes Real Estate. A. Warner Homes has a special. If you're a veteran or a first responder and you mentioned that you heard this ad on the Life's Worth Living podcast, they're going to pay for your appraisal and your home inspection. Reach out to them at 801-867-5078. That is, again, A. Warner Homes Real Estate. So I'm really excited for episode 12. A little bit has happened. I keep updating you guys each week, but I'm super stoked. We are now being heard in 11 countries, thanks to that person in Poland. So I really appreciate that. So 11 countries, and I appreciate you coming back for another episode. I'm really excited tonight. You can tell we're doing it by Zoom. I've got a really good friend of mine, Seth Adam Smith. He's our guest tonight, and he's coming to you from Phoenix, Arizona. So thanks for joining us, Seth.
Oh, thank you, John. It's an honor.
Well, I've been looking forward to this, so I'm glad that you're here. So, as you're aware, we talk about a lot of things on this podcast. We talk about some positive stories, some mental health issues, some suicide stories, and, in hopes that maybe if you're in a place that maybe some of these stories will uplift you and let you know that, you know what, hey, if this person has made it through, there's hope for me. Maybe I can get through whatever I'm going through. And so that's why I've joined Seth Adam Smith for us tonight. So Seth, can you kind of take us back? Tell us your earliest childhood memory when you realized that maybe depression was going to be something that you were going to deal with.
Well, that's a good question, actually. I mean, I certainly remember very, very dark times in my early childhood. And when I have, the lens that I have now, I can certainly look back and be like, oh, okay, yeah, that was a little bit more than just feeling blue. That was a little bit more than perhaps low self-esteem at school. It was pretty intense emotional feelings and feelings of low self-worth. Pretty intense for a kid. But I think the time that I really was really understood that I was going through something, and those emotions were really manifesting themselves, I guess in ways where I was taking actions, to really hinder myself, and then eventually hurt myself, was in my early 20s. Now there were some things, in junior high school, obviously, just growing up. But my early 20s is when it took a very dark turn, and I was actively hindering my own progress in life. I was limiting my own potential. I wasn't doing anything with family or friends, isolating quite a bit. I wasn't pursuing anything meaningful at all. And I started thinking incredibly dark thoughts about myself and whether or not I should live anymore. That was when, it took a very, very dark turn and very, I guess that was a very pivotal time in my life.
So tell me, you mentioned that you isolated, and I think that's something that's fairly common as people go through hard times. They kind of withdraw, they keep to themselves and isolate from those that they love. How did you see that affect what you were going through? Did you see that it helped you? Was it Did it prolong it? How did isolation come into play as far as you're getting through it?
Well, so there's good evidence to suggest that there's a healthy form of isolation where you take time to reflect, you take time to think about and strategize and energize. And that is something that I love doing. I've always been really introverted. I love to write and to read, spend time, just on walks. I really do value my time alone. However, the texture of this, the feel of this isolation, and in my early 20s was very different. It was less about re-energizing and more about harming. Like I could feel that, like it was more about hurting myself. Like there was this edge to it within me that, no, if I spend time with that person, this family member or this friend, whatever is inside of me is actually going to make them a worse person. It's going to harm their life. So I need to isolate myself so that I don't contaminate them, in other words. And so that was a very different texture, than it wasn't re-energizing. It was isolating to protect them from whatever was inside of me, causing me to harm myself and my outlook on life.
And I've never heard it described that way, but I like how that came across, because I could see that happening. So I appreciate that. So that was in your 20s.
Yeah.
And how long did that continue?
Well, that's hard to say. So when I tell people my story, I'll tell them, about an experience I had with my brother, and it was immediately after I tried to take my life. So it was about September of 2006. I went into work just feeling as dark as I've ever felt. My brother was actually my supervisor where I worked. I clocked in. I worked for a little while. I clocked out. I went back to my parents' house at the time where I lived, and just started writing all of the goodbyes to everybody. And then I made the attempt. It was a very serious attempt. This wasn't some therapists I've talked to, they'll talk about people who try to take their life more as an expression, a cry for help. So there's not a real strong intent behind it as it is like, I don't know what else to do, and it manifests as a cry for help. This was a very serious intent. I did not want to be found. And so I make that point because it was miraculous that I was found. Now, not everybody's story is like that. And I sometimes hesitate to share that because I know that there are mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and friends who do everything they can to find that person that they love, and they don't. They don't find them in time, right? And so I understand that, and I can't make sense of that sometimes. Like I think of that a lot. My experience was a miracle, and I don't understand the full implications of that, but I don't take it lightly, because I was found. I was found by my father, and I was physically found. I was physically saved by my father, but I was, I guess, spiritually saved by my brother, by my brother Sean. And you have to know Sean. My brother Sean is just one of the worst people that I know, and I say that lovingly. This is coming from a little brother talking about his older brother. He was this bully growing up, and we never got along. There was nothing we liked mutually. There was nothing we could talk about. He liked sports and I liked Star Trek. It was a doomed relationship. It was a doomed, brotherhood, I guess. But I could never connect with him. I never could understand him. I never thought he had emotions. My mom said, "Oh, he's a sweet boy. He's got a tender heart." And I'm like, "Where? I didn't even know he had a heart. Like, I don't understand this. Like, that doesn't make sense to me." She's like, "He's like a teddy bear." And I'm like, "Yeah, he's like a teddy bear dipped in cement, or like a chocolate covered razor blade. I don't understand. Like, there's some pain in there, But you have to know that about Sean. You do have to know that about my brothers, that I never thought that he had a sentimental feeling toward me. And so when I woke up in the hospital and saw my brother Sean emotional, crying at the hospital, and then when he helped me home after the hospital into my bed, and just he laid me down on one side of the bed, and then he sat down on the other side of the bed. I fell asleep. I was still pretty traumatized from the event, so I fell asleep and woke up hours later. It was hours later. It had to have been at least 3. And he was still there. He was still sitting there. And I was kind of shocked by this. I thought, does he think I'm just going to harm myself again? Like, is that why he's here? Did my mom tell him to stay just to keep an eye on me? So I said to him, "Well, Sean, you don't have to stay here. You can go. I'm fine. I'm just going to sleep. I'll watch something and I'll be fine." And then he said, it was very quiet, but it was very heartfelt. He said, "Seth, I almost lost my little brother. So I don't think I'm going to go anywhere for a while." And there was something about that that stuck with me. And still, that was 14, 15 years ago, and it sticks with me. Because, like I said, of who he was, like, I never understood, I never thought that he had that sort of feeling about me. And something about making that connection opened up my world. Like, I had viewed this relationship with my brother in one way, and it wasn't that way. I had viewed my relationship with my brother for 20 years as this sort of, antagonistic relationship, that we were never really friends. He's just my older brother. He was a bully, and so something about that, seeing that paradigm shift, it just opened things up. It opened up a whole world to me, because suddenly I saw, well, maybe if I'm misinterpreting this relationship, maybe if I misinterpreted that for 20 years, right? Maybe there's a possibility that I've been misinterpreting a lot of things in my life right now. Maybe I'm not who I think I am. Maybe the darkness that I see in myself isn't real. Because I thought my relationship with my brother wasn't, that there wasn't really anything there. Maybe there's a whole world, a different world outside of the dark world that I've been seeing this for years, right? And so that started the change. Now, I want to, rush to say that he didn't change my life, right? That's a very important fact I have to make, is that, my brother, my mom, my dad, they could have done, and they did do everything that they could have done in their power. They did. And therapists and good friends and good neighbors, they came and they offered help and assistance, and it was incredible. But that wasn't what changed me in a permanent sense, in a way that saved me, right? That wasn't what did it. My life didn't rest on them, in a sense. Like, if they hadn't done this, then, I wouldn't be here today. That's not the case. Where the sustaining change came from was when I decided I want to be better. I want to live. That was when life just opened up. Like, I could see a whole lot of things, a whole host of things that I couldn't fix, right? There were people I had offended and things I had done that really couldn't be fixed, at least not in the immediate sense. Perhaps in time I could try to amend or fix or correct some of those things. And maybe there was something to be said about genetics. Like I know we do have a family history of mental illness, and maybe there's something that could be said about that maybe there's some things I can't quite fix in that regard. And I understand that. I'm okay with that. But the moment I decided, okay, what can I do to get better? Is there something I can do to get better? What are the things I can do? I know there's some things I can't do. What are some things I can do to get better, to move forward? And as soon as I decided that I wanted to get better, that's when life started to get better. But it took, it was like 5 years before I felt like me. Like I felt like I made it. Like I felt like I'm here. I'm back. It was before my spirit felt like my body they were on the same page in a sense. And I want to say that too, because, I could tell a story right here. I just did, and I did it in about 10 minutes, but that was an entire, 5 years I condensed into 10 minutes. And people sometimes want that solution. They want to take some sort of medication that makes it better immediately, and that's not the case. If you want to get better, it's you make a commitment to do everything you can for as long as you have to get better. That's what life is.
And what you said reminded me of something that I hear time and time again, and to take it kind of in a different direction. The way you described that was a lot like somebody that suffers with an addiction trying to find a recovery. Well, a recovery doesn't happen until you're ready to have it happen. And that's kind of what you just said. In a sense, you're getting better wasn't going to happen until you were ready for that. And I've never heard that described that way either. And so I appreciate you saying that, because I think you do have to have that will and desire to get better. Yeah. And there's no instant fixes where I'm going to take this pill or do this thing and boom, you're magically healed and better. Wouldn't it be great if that was the case? But there's a lot of trial and error in trying to find the solution. And it does take time, and you have to be patient. And I think a lot of people get frustrated with that, with the being patient enough to get that where it needs to be dialed in, if you will.
Yeah. And that was something that I found to be very helpful when I was hoping to get better. I wanted it to look like something that I had in my mind, some concrete images, but when I changed how I thought about it, everything got better. So instead of thinking of it as making it to this plateau or this point and staying there for the rest of my life, if I changed it and thought about life as more of a hike, a perpetual hike, a hike until the end of my natural life, that's where it became a lot more meaningful and better, because a hike, you could have any variety of obstacles and challenges and summits and plateaus, and then you descend down into canyons and difficulties and bad weather. You could have all of those things, and you're still making progress. As long as you're determined to move forward, you're still making progress. You're getting healthier. You're getting more experience. It's challenging. It's always going to be challenging. But as long as you accept that it's always going to be challenging, that is M. Scott Peck, the road less traveled, he said, life is difficult. That's the first opening sentences. He says, life is difficult. And as soon as you accept that, everything becomes easier. And it's true. As soon as you accept that the walking of life is challenging and hard and difficult, and that's okay, suddenly it opens up this whole new way of feeling about the progress you're making.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way you described that as life as a hike made me kind of stop and reflect on I've talked to you about the fact that our foundation does the 100-mile walk to Wendover. And for those of you that maybe aren't in Utah, you've heard of the Salt Flats, where people set their land speed records, and they've had a movie, The World's Fastest Indian, and things that were filmed on that. It's hard to imagine finding beauty in that hike. But the one thing that that kind of touched me or inspired me as we did it the first, second, third, fourth time was no matter where you're at on a hike, I mean, you can be in a lush forest or in the Red Rocks or on the Salt Flats. Your eye, I think, is trained to find beauty where you are. And whether it was this cracked up salt flat with a little flower coming out of it, or whatever. It's amazing how your eye can be trained to find beauty. And I think that's kind of like life. I mean, you can look at it and say, man, I'm in maybe the ugliest place on earth, and this is the Salt Flats, and who would want to be here? And I think if you're looking for it, you'll find beauty no matter where you're at. Even if life is hard, you'll find little spots of beauty that kind of inspire you to keep going forward.
Yeah. And on the Salt Flats, I mean, I remember driving through that on the way to San Francisco a few times. And when you get there around when the sun has set, but it's still light out, those purpley kind of hues, the blue, I mean, it's incredible. The white and the purple. I mean, yeah. But I still think you guys are crazy for doing that hike.
We are crazy. And it's one thing that stood out to me too on that was we live in Utah. We've got, the greatest snow on earth, right? We have all these ski resorts. It's the one place that's completely opposite of Utah. It looks like there's snow on the valley floor and the mountains have no snow. And so it's kind of a flip-flop of reality. It's kind of this weird Alice in Wonderland type feeling. You're like, wait, this is wrong. But there's beauty in life's challenges. There's beauty in the hard things that you go through. You just got to be looking for it.
Yeah, you don't ever talk about the days are good. You don't have a most memorable day of watching television. You have you talk about the days that are hard, and you talk about the things that you learned from your extremities. And then even then, when you've gone through this really difficult and grueling hike, when you're talking about it 2 or 3 years later with your friends, you don't remember the bugs. You're not talking about the bugs and the sweat. You're talking about, yeah, we got to the top and we took these photos and this funny thing happened and he said this and I laughed, and you're talking about all of the good things. Nobody remembers the bugs and the sweat. Nobody talks about that. It's just amazing how the mind will laser focus on what you tell it to find.
Which is primarily why we only do the walk once a year. We need that 11 months to have them forget the things that were so hard so that we can.
Exactly.
I said as we all jumped on the tour bus as we hit Wendover and we were driving to the photo shot at the end. There's a Wendover wheel, a big cowboy in the middle of the strip. And as we were driving, I said, they said it couldn't be done. They said I couldn't find 200 people dumb enough to try to walk 100 miles in the desert. And yet here you are. The next year they're all ready to do it again because it's almost as if it's something that's not possible for one person to do, but together, it's possible. When you have that added help and the added encouragement, and, if you were going to do it again, you'd give up at mile marker 98, versus rocking it all out. So yeah, I really enjoy the way that you explain that.
Exactly. Yeah, it's true. It's when you have people pulling together, the burden becomes less burdensome. Yeah.
And I think when you isolate yourself from those who love you and want to encourage you and help you through those hard times, you lose that. I mean, usually we're isolating from the people that really want the best for us, the ones that really want to see us make it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's an interesting point, because I sort of railed against the idea of a God or a creator for a long time, particularly when I was struggling with depression, because I guess the idea, the thought, feeling was, if there is a God, why would he allow not only my own feelings, but all of this, suffering in the world, but that feeling of isolation that you get, and it's interesting because when you do develop a relationship with God or the Creator, God has you do the very thing that is contrary to what your natural inclination is. So when you're wounded or when you're emotionally hurt, or when you're suffering, particularly in regards to men, when we suffer, we isolate, we throw up these walls, we push away from people, we keep them at a distance, and we just suffer in silence. We push away from people. And we know, even in terms of science, biology, being with people has restorative healing elements to it. I mean, just natural associations with people tends to improve our mental well-being. And so it's interesting to see that, regardless of what religion, when God is associating with man, he's asking, man to go out and serve other people. And I don't think that's necessarily because God needs you to do something on his behalf. I think it's because he needs something to be done on your behalf. Like, he knows that's what's going to help you. He knows that's what's going to heal you, is serving and being with, associating with other people, connecting. That is going to lift you up in the end. Yeah. And so I think that command to love and serve other people, I think in a very weird, paradoxical way, as most of these spiritual things go, you're lifting other people, you're also lifting yourself.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, like you said, in serving others, I think you always can find somebody who's got it worse than you do. And for some reason, they're there. They just pop up.
Exactly.
They're there, and you're going, holy cow, how are they getting through this? And, you start to think, wow, I've got it so bad. And you find people that are having their own trials, but there's a way that you can look at it and just say, I've got it pretty good, and there's something, I mentioned a couple of podcasts ago when we were talking to the people that run Honor 365, veteran suicide organization, saying there's something about talking to them about running that organization, that there's something addictive about having that positivity of trying to do something for someone. Doing a good thing makes you feel good. Yeah. And if you've got an addictive personality like me, I mean, you're all in. Let's do it again. Let's do it again. So, yeah, I agree completely with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was something that I learned when I was hiking the Grand Canyon. I hike the Grand Canyon. I mean, I live down here in Arizona, and for some reason I got addicted to hiking the Grand Canyon, which is it's a stupid addiction to have, but I'll go almost every other month and hike the Grand Canyon. Again, I see it. I see there's sort of two things that I see when I'm hiking the Grand Canyon: the physical beauty of the landscape, but also there's this spiritual message that's being conveyed about life. You're hiking through this beautiful vista, but also this very challenging course in a sense. And it's hard, it's difficult to get to the summit. But when you do, it's so rewarding. Any challenge that you come across in life, as you push through it, getting through and getting to the top, it's so rewarding. And I was hiking the Grand Canyon in November. No, it was November of 2016. It was before my first child, my daughter, was born. And my wife went up to Utah to go have a baby shower. So that meant I was home alone. I'll go hike the Grand Canyon. And I went there and I had the whole canyon to myself. I went in, I didn't see one person the entire time, which I love. I don't like being interrupted. I don't like friendly tourists trying to talk to me and find out my backstory. I don't want to, that's not why I'm there. I'm there to hike, be alone. I love it. I love that. So I was getting that restorative, vibe, right? And so I'm getting to the end of the hike, going up it's called Jacob's Ladder. It's right there. It's on the Bright Angel Trail, and it's just this switchbacks going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. They call it Jacob's Ladder. And so, in fact, there's this photo of Teddy Roosevelt standing on that. And I'm trying to find exactly where it was. One day I will find it. I keep bringing the photo up. I'm trying to find the exact formation of rocks to see where he stood. But I'm going up that, and I just kept thinking over and over to myself. I'm like, oh, it's wonderful to be alone. I'm the only one here going through this, experiencing this right now. And this is wonderful. I like being here alone. And I was getting to the top. It was getting dark because it's winter. And so the sun's setting a lot earlier, and it was dark enough that I had to use a flashlight. And the moment I pulled out the flashlight, I looked down the canyon. I'm seeing those purple hues out in the distance that I love so much. And I looked down and I noticed for the first time that I'm not alone. There's these little tiny, tiny pinpricks of light way down in the canyon, and they're moving slowly up. I mean, there was probably at least 10 of them going up in just different spots. And there was something about that image that just struck me. I remember thinking, wow, I wasn't alone this whole time. And I don't know why, it burned itself into my mind. I remember thinking, you have to remember this. This is very important. Just seeing those little lights go up. Well, fast forward about a month later, my daughter was born. It's my first child, right? And I'm holding her for the first time, and she opens up her eyes and looks at me, this brand new life in the world. And she's looking at me, and in her eyes, I see these little lights. It's not like a physical light. It's a light of a person, a spirit inside of this little body. And something about seeing that and remembering the Grand Canyon and making this connection that, this is a life. This is someone who hasn't done anything for me, and yet something about her is just more precious than anything I've ever held in my life. And I was thinking about those people who were walking, and I didn't know who they were, but they were hiking in the canyon by themselves in the dark. And I made this connection that, I'm holding this child, my child, and she has this light about her and this value to her, and she hasn't done really anything that the world would consider amazing, except exist, And I made that connection that there are people out there who are struggling and walking in darkness, and maybe they feel like they haven't done anything that the world would consider of value. But to someone, everything they do, the breath that they take means everything to them, to that person, right? And I realized then, that as much as I like to be an introvert, as much as I like to hike by myself, I knew then, holding my daughter, that I had to do everything that I could do in my power to talk about suicide prevention, because I wanted my daughter to grow up in a world where she knew, and the world knew, how valued they were and how much potential her life and their lives have. I didn't want her to grow up in a world where suicide was a crisis like it is now. with the rates are skyrocketing, and potentially the rates of suicide could skyrocket even more after all of this coronavirus and the panic and the job losses and everything that's happening as a result, all of the livelihoods that have been destroyed. I mean, I think it's always needed. Suicide prevention is always needed, but I think now more than ever, if you're even feeling like you need to raise your voice and let people know that their life matters, then you're seeing that same thing. You're seeing the light in the canyon, and there's someone in the darkness who needs you.
Well, that's an amazing way to put it. So on that same line, if you could go back in time to 20-year-old Seth at the depth of his despair, what would you tell him?
Well, I mean, humorously, I'm thinking of a whole bunch of Back to the Future situations. You're not supposed to encounter yourself, right? That's breaking the rules.
That's right.
Yeah, but I would. There's a host of stories that I would tell myself. I mean, if I could have written a book of inspirational stories, I would certainly share those stories with myself. I mean, that's something that I would have valued then, is being able to read historical stories of people who had made it. But on a very personal level, I just would have showed him a picture of my family right now. I mean, we've got 3 kids, basically 3 kids under 3. We have a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old. We also have a foster daughter. It's about 2 months old. It's pandemonium at our house. It's just a whirlwind of chaos, but it's the most beautiful chaos I've ever been a part of. It's wonderful. You see the hand of God every day, just in the lives of these little kids. You see it. So I would have shown him that, and I think I would have talked to him about. I think I would have told him the story of adopting our son. I don't know if I could adequately express the feelings of being an adoptive father. It's just very unique. We call him, his nickname. We have nicknames for all of our kids. The 3-year-old, we call her Squid. She's into everything. We call her Squid. She's got arms everywhere. The 2-year-old we call the bear, the Yeti, because he's got quite the roar on him. And he had a lot of hair in the ultrasound. You could see it just swaying in there. We call him the bear. But the 1-year-old, the one we adopted, we call him Superman, because Superman was adopted too. And he really is. He really is a little Superman, and he's got this sweet little spirit, and he lights up every time you come into a room, like every time he sees his mom or sees his dad, me, he just lights up. And you think about that and knowing what I know of his story and his background and what the potential outcome for his life might have been, I always think about now, the life he's going to live as a result of the fact that I lived, right? That's not to say that my life is so special and so wonderful. It's not an aggrandizement of who I am. It's just, it's a humble recognition that I lived. And because I lived, this boy gets to live and have a brother and a sister and a mother and a father who take care of him and see him as a Superman, right? And I never would have predicted that. I never would have foreseen that as an outcome, as a possibility for my life. Never would have thought that I was going to adopt. And I know that there are people out there who are struggling with similar feelings to what I struggled with, perhaps even darker feelings, and perhaps even greater traumas that I could even imagine. and they're probably thinking there's no way that my life has any positive potential, right? That's a lie. Like, there's these kids out there who need someone to see something good in them. And the moment they have someone see something good in them, they just blossom, they just flourish. They light up a room because you walk into it, right? Because you walk into it, not someone else. And that I don't have the words to explain that feeling of being in that room when we adopted him. It's something else. It's surreal. It makes you really humble to know that you're a person who's giving this child a future, and that's a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Yeah, it is. That is amazing. It is amazing. And you think there's all these children that need to be adopted because parents have given them up to give them a better life, and how many of them don't end up in that scenario, and so things could have turned out a whole lot different if it hadn't been for your love and making him Superman. Because in all honesty, there's a lot of power in words, and just to have somebody give you a nickname like that, like you believe in him, is going to empower him to do great things and be who he's destined to be.
Yeah, so that's the same, for anyone. I mean, I think people who are struggling right now, listening to this, so often we are just so tempted to think the very worst of ourselves. And that's our, you see that reflected in our inclination to look at the worst news on the news right now, about the pandemic. There's a lot of good news. There's a lot of good news right now. But we're more inclined to click on what is negative. We've got to see that. We got to prepare for that danger, that outcome. And so our inclination is to think very negatively of ourselves. And again, that's what brings me back to God, because I think, when you talk about addiction recovery, my grandfather, he was not able to recover at all, ever, for years and years and years. My grandfather was not able to recover for years until he went to AA, until he went to a program that introduced him to God. And there's something about believing in something higher in yourself, and that higher power believes in you. Believes in the potential that you have to become something more than what you are. I can't explain it. I don't know the science behind that, but I know it works. And I know it's really, for me, it was the only thing that worked. God has you do everything that you can do on your own, and then he provides the miracle. And I've seen that. I've seen that in my life. Right? I did everything I could on my own. I went to the therapists. I went to counselors. I worked with family and friends. I cleaned up my life, and I went to addiction recovery meetings and did everything I could do. And then that's when, God stepped in and basically raised Lazarus from the dead.
Yeah.
Then he did what I could not, the miraculous thing that I could not.
Well, and it takes me back to another thing you said, but when your daughter was born and you were looking into her eyes, and here she hadn't really done anything for you. She hadn't, provided for you in your old age. She hadn't, the amazing Father's Day gift, but yet there was something about her that you instantly loved. And I think that's the same way with God or whatever, that he looks at each of us as his children and loves us for who we are. And the fact that we're all different, we're all unique. We all bring things to the table, and we all have our weaknesses, and despite all the weaknesses, he loves us anyway. So I like that. I like that a lot. So, what do you think? What's the key? I mean, you've been involved in suicide prevention for some time. After going through what you've gone through, what's the key? What are we missing?
Oh, wow. That's a loaded question, I think, right?
I told you hard ones.
Let me expound all of the wisdom that I know, which is very little. It's like you could fill up a fortune cookie. Really, to me, the most important thing and the best play that you could make, the best bet you can make, mm-hmm. is to move forward. And it sounds so simple and a little dumb. Like it sounds like one of those things that someone might say to you again, or like on a fortune cookie. It's just a stupid saying that you throw away. Like, just keep moving forward. That is so dumb, Seth. That is so dumb. But it's actually a lot more profound, and it becomes more and more profound the more and more I think about it as time goes on, because the idea of moving forward, it actually acknowledges quite a bit. When you decide to move forward, it acknowledges that you're in a place you don't want to be anymore. You get your bearings, you know where you are right now. And you say, well, I don't want to be at this point anymore. I want to move forward. And you have to think, well, where am I moving forward to? So then you actually have to come up with a goal or a destination in mind to move forward towards. And then you start moving, and everything that I have read and studied in terms of the overcoming feelings of depression and low self-esteem, everything that I read, shows, the evidence just shows over and over again that the mind and the body respond positively, very extraordinarily positively towards movement, exercise, motion, sunlight, right? Being outdoors, putting your body to work, getting things done, accomplishing goals. Like, that is what the body was built for. The body and the mind were built for intensive labor, for intensive struggle. But that's what we as humans were made to do. Now, whether you think of that spiritually or in terms of science, it's just, biology, that's what we were built. This only the strongest or the fittest survive, the survival of the fittest. But spiritually, like Adam, by the sweat of your brow, you'll eat for the rest of your days, right? That's on both ends of the spectrum. That's what we were made to do. And so when we don't do that, when we feel this sort of mist or this cloud, life's ambiguous. We don't know where we want to go, what we want to do. And, we tend to isolate or sit a lot more. That's where the danger sort of creeps in. We don't feel like we're making progress. We don't feel like we're getting anything done. You just start to deteriorate inside. You start to kind of work against yourself. My mind, if I sit still too long, my mind will start to work against me. And so I have to point it at a project or at something else. I have to put it to a task. And so, as simple as it sounds, it could just be a goal to, I'm gonna organize this one thing right now. And you do that. And if you do that, accomplishing that, moving forward in that regard, that small task that you've given yourself, it actually gives you a small dopamine rush in your brain. Like, oh, I accomplished this goal. Well, what other goals can I accomplish? And it puts you on this upward spiral of things to accomplish. But you can move that towards larger goals and larger things you want to accomplish. Like people who want to run marathons, or myself, when I like to hike the Grand Canyon, there's a very clear goal in mind. People who want to write books, or people who want to start nonprofits, or people who want to do podcasts like yourself, or hike or do crazy things like walk across the salt flats. It's a very specific goals in mind, and it puts you on this upward trajectory, and then it makes your mind start thinking about other possibilities. And so I really do think it can be as basic as moving forward, because you make all of those assessments in that very simple statement.
I like that. I think that's true. You keep moving and having that goal in mind. And I think it was Admiral William McRaven that wrote the book, Make Your Bed. I don't know if you've read that.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about it, yeah.
You get up and you make that bed, and if everything else goes terrible that day, you accomplished that one thing. And I think it's as simple as that you've got to have that goal in mind. Always have something that you're working towards. It doesn't have to be grandiose or so difficult that you don't know you'll ever reach the end of it. It could be something as simple as, like he said, make your bed, and
Exactly.
you'll know that you've done something. So yeah, I appreciate that. I like that. So everybody doesn't know, I had reached out to you in February, and I begged and I pleaded and I says, hey, you want to come up to Utah? We're going to do this event. And I really love to have you as this speaker at the event and tell your story. And when I asked that, I'll be honest with you, when I asked that, I thought for sure you were going to be like, yeah, no, appreciate the offer, but I'm good down here. When you're in Arizona in February, the idea of coming to Utah in February might not be as attractive.
Right, exactly.
And I was so excited when you said yes. Yeah, I'd love to come up and I'd love to share my experience with everybody. And I had so many comments after that speaking arrangement. I had so many comments where people said that they were moved by what you said and with your story. And I teased you about it. I kept saying, you're the closer. You gotta finish this off. You're going to be the one everybody's going to remember you're the last speaker of the day, and stressed you out about
it. It was very tense. It was very tense.
And here I was just playing. I was just like, it's going to be, and you did amazing. At the end of the day, you shared some stories that were kind of historical in nature, but you shared some stories, and I loved what you shared. Do you want to tell us a story tonight? Tell us something do you have anything at the top of your head or?
Sure. I mean, I'll share with you. You can see it's over. If you're watching the video of this, I've got a painting over my shoulder of the story that I shared. I could send you a picture to it. You can share with your subscribers if they want to look at it. But it's my favorite historical story. I love history. I love history. I love history unvarnished, because so often we look in history and we want to look at our heroes and sort of wipe the sweat off their faces and polish them up and make them into marble statues or bronze statues. And we want to make them out to be more than human. What happens when you do that is that you lose your connection with them when they become mythological, when they become larger than life. You don't connect with them. And that's why when you get into a history class, a lot of people are like, oh man, history, it's just so dumb, because they don't see the humanity of it. But when you connect with them, when you start to see the humanity of these people, you realize, wow, they're just like me. History is filled with stories that could relate to me. And it just opens up a whole new world, a whole new way of perceiving and seeing life. I think, my favorite story, and we can, I guess, if you want to hear more, I could share more. And I've got lots of stories that I share on my YouTube channel. I do everything by my full name. So if anybody wants to look at those things, it's just Seth Adam Smith. So you could type that up on anywhere and you'd find me. But the story that I love to share is the story called The Person Who Changed the World. And it takes place in turn of the century Russia, around the 1900s. It's about a young man who was as arrogant as they come, and this is by his own admission, and several sources close to him. They say he was spoiled rotten. He was one of the most arrogant and just really callous people. He would just say what he thought, and he never thought good things of other people, only thought good things of himself. And he went to university and got a group of friends who were sort of like him. They thought they knew everything, and they got these crazy ideas about how Russia, how the government, how the king, the czar in Russia should do and behave, how he should act. And so they started writing their ideas and publishing them in papers. And if you know anything about Russian history, you at least know that you don't criticize the Russian leader. Like, they always clamp down on that pretty quick. And so the Tsar at the time, he was furious at what they were writing and publishing. And so he had this young man and all of his friends arrested. And he had them in jail for a time. And then in the middle of winter, he had them all pulled out of jail and brought before a firing squad. And this is a part of the story I thought, now this can't be real. This has to be romanticized, like this has to be like someone's embellishing. But I went through and I read the account, and it's true. And it seems so unbelievable to me, but they brought them before a firing squad, and the guards, the executioners, they lowered their weapons at these young men, and they were about to fire. It was about 1 second to go. They count down, and they're right at 1, and they're going to shoot. That exact moment, they're pardoned. The Tsar pardons them, and instead of executing them, he's going to send them away to Siberia, hard labor in Siberia, which is basically anything east of a certain mountain range. Very cold over there, but they were going to go to basically a concentration camp where they would work for 7 years. And so it's arguably not much better than being executed, but at that point they would take just anything. And so they get ready. They're going to a train, and they're boarding this train. They're in chains and everything. And this young man, this arrogant young man, who's now contemplating how miserable his life is and how worthless he is and how he wishes he could just take back all of those things he had done that had led him to this moment, and how no one is going to take pity on him. No one cares about him. Even his own family hadn't come out to see him because he had lived such a miserable little life, So he's about ready to board the train, and this unnamed, unknown woman comes through the crowd, approaches him, and gives him a gift. It's a pocket New Testament. They had just published the Russian version, the Russian language version of the New Testament that, Russians, just in the common language of the Russians, could read. And she had that. It was the pocket version of the New Testament, and inside were some rubles, some Russian money. And, at that camp, they could actually use some money to buy things to make their life a bit more comfortable. And so she came up and she gave him those two things, basically providing for his physical well-being and his spiritual well-being. She gave him those things, and she left. She didn't introduce herself. She didn't say who she was. She just gave him this gift and left. And this young man was stunned. He says that he was stunned by this gift. He didn't know why anyone would do this for him, being who he was and what he had done, why anyone would select him and give him a gift, of money and a book for him to read. Well, he went to Siberia, and he carried this book with him for the rest of his life. I mean, for the rest of his life, literally, he had it with him. He had it underneath his pillow in prison, that he would sleep underneath it. His head would be on it while he would sleep, and he would read from it every day in prison. And then on his deathbed, he had his daughter, years and years and years later, he had his daughter read it to him. And the scripture that she read to him is really rather beautiful as well. I mean, it was a scripture about, if a seed falls by itself and it doesn't open, it dies. But if it opens up, it transforms into something more beautiful. And I think that's sort of a lesson of his life, because when he left prison, instead of writing things about the government or about the Tsar, he wrote about Christ-like figures that would come into the story and basically save the day, in a sense, that would redeem other characters in a way. And so he wrote The Brothers Karamazov, Crime and Punishment. His name is Fyodor Dostoevsky, and most people might not recognize that name, and that's okay. No one needs to really know that name per se. But he was very popular with Russians, very popular. And to this day, he's required reading. But interestingly enough, his books were read by another famous Russian author, the Russian author Leo Tolstoy. And Tolstoy actually said that Dostoevsky's writings inspired his own writings. And so Tolstoy wrote these books and these other important works. And he said that the inspiration for those writings came from Dostoevsky. But Tolstoy had a correspondence with another person who people would recognize right away. I mean, he had an actual correspondence of letters with a man in India named Mahatma Gandhi. And Mahatma Gandhi said that his entire movement of civil disobedience was inspired largely in part because of Leo Tolstoy. Leo Tolstoy had written a lot of material on civil disobedience, on saying no to an oppressive government. So Gandhi had been inspired by Tolstoy, and Tolstoy had been inspired by Dostoevsky. Well, we know that Gandhi inspired, one of our own famous political figures or social activists here, and that was Martin Luther King Jr. You can see this ripple effect that really comes from Dostoevsky, the person who changed the world, right? This person, who had been on his way to prison when he was interrupted by someone who wanted to give him a gift, an unnamed someone. And I just said that the person who changed the world, I named my painting The Person Who Changed the World based on that historical experience. But it doesn't actually refer to Dostoevsky, although Dostoevsky's writings did change the world. I'm not talking about Dostoevsky as the person who changed the world. I'm talking about the woman who came and gave this gift to Dostoevsky, that she was the person who changed the world. And we don't know her name. We don't know what kind of life she led, what kind of mistakes she may have made in her own life, how perfect or imperfect she was. But we do know that she looked upon someone else who was struggling in darkness, and she decided to help. And for her, maybe it seemed like, I didn't do enough. Maybe she thought her whole life that she hadn't ever done anything worth mentioning, But she reached out to this man who thought the same of himself, who thought he hadn't done anything worth living for, right? And it's just interesting to me to see how often we think of our little acts of service as maybe that wasn't enough. Maybe I could have done more, but I can see from my perspective as being the beneficiary of someone who has come out, into my own personal darkness and helped me and shared with me and offered kindness to me, that person changed my world. Right? And that person showed me the world. Right? And I can guarantee, I can promise that whatever you do in service and in love for someone else, it might not make the difference that you're hoping for, that you're seeing, that you'd like to see, but I promise you it will make a difference. I promise you that there will be a ripple effect as a result of that. And it might not come in the way and the time and that you're hoping for, but it will have a positive effect. And I see that story and that painting of the person who changed the world as a story about you, about the people listening to this story, about the individuals, at large, so that they can be the person who changed the world.
I think that all of us have that capability. All of us have the ability to make a difference in someone's life. And I know that you have, in everything you've been doing to try to be effective in suicide prevention. You lived it, you knew how hard it was, and now you've dedicated so much of your time and your efforts into making the world a better place. And you are like her in giving that small gift to everybody. And so I can't thank you enough for hanging out with me tonight and for your friendship. I really appreciate it. And you inspire me every time we talk, that to feel like maybe what we're doing is making a difference. And so I hope you know that you're making a difference in everybody's life that you come across. So tell everybody so they can find you at Seth Adam Smith. You have a very popular video called Sitting on the Bench. You're an author. Tell us the books. Tell us the name of the books.
The story for another day. I wrote a viral blog post called "Marriage Isn't for You," and that was viewed quite a bit. And that they turned that into a gift book. And then I did a sequel on that, basically called "Your Life Isn't for You," and it's an extension of basically what we've been talking about. In fact, Dostoevsky's story is in that book. It's when you live your life outside of yourself, in a way. When you dedicate yourself to something larger than yourself, you actually live a more abundant life. So that's another book I've written, and then I've been dabbling in fiction writing. I really enjoy fiction, so I've got a novel out, and I've got a couple more on the way, and we'll see what else I can come up with in between the chaos of home life with the kids clamoring for attention. Basically, at this point, I'm less of a writer and more of a glorified sewage technician. I just clean up diapers and all of that. So it's a pretty busy wiping bums right now, but hopefully
somebody's got to do it.
Someone's got to do it. And yeah, I'll tell you what, well, my wife does help quite a bit, but every time I have to do just one diaper, I think, oh, she's not doing nearly as much as she could be doing. But it's been, it's a blessing to be busy. Like I said, to be moving forward towards any goal is just, it's a gift. It's a miracle. And I'm grateful every day. Especially in regards to my kids. I'm just grateful every day for every moment. Life truly is worth living.
Very well said. I hope everybody will take the time, look up Seth Adam Smith, watch his videos. You're a great guy. I am glad that you're still here. I really am. Because you've changed my life just in the short months that we've corresponded and spoken and had you come up here. And I know in that room of 100 people or whatever that were there with us in February, how many comments. I wished you could have heard all the comments that we're grateful for what you said and for being there. And so thank you very much. And for anybody that's watching this podcast tonight, if you're struggling, if you're in a dark place right now, don't isolate. Reach out to somebody. We all know people that love us and care about us and only want the best for us. Reach out to somebody. Tell them what you're going through. Everyone wants you to succeed. Everybody wants you here tomorrow. Don't believe the lies that sometimes our minds will tell us. But if you don't have somebody that you can turn to or that you feel comfortable with, reach out to the Lifeline. Call 1-800-273-8255. Talk to somebody. And again, I want to thank our sponsor, GTM Builders, for making this podcast possible, giving us a place to record. They are so popular. We were getting ready to start recording tonight, and I heard the door open, and they closed the model homes at 6, and we were set up ready to go, and all of a sudden a realtor walked in and says, I've got some people that wanted to look at it. So we stopped, and so thanks, Seth, for being patient with me and allowing us to kind of postpone for a few minutes, let them walk through. GTM builds a beautiful home. And for our sponsor of this podcast tonight, for this episode, A. Warner Homes Real Estate. So if you're looking to buy or sell a home, reach out to A. Warner Homes at 801-867-5078. And whatever brought us together, I'm sure grateful that you're here. And I look forward to sharing another guest with you next week. But thanks, Seth. Thanks for being here, and good night, everybody.